I call this meeting to an order for Malaya County Transportation Commission on November 29, 2023. And we have the roll call, please. I heard that a couple of times.
Commissioner Gallegos. Commissioner Poitras.
Yes.
Commissioner Rodriguez. Commissioner Rogers. Chair Ahmed.
Yes.
Commissioner Gonzalez is absent today. We have a quorum.
Please join me to ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That public comment this time is made available for comment from the public on matters within the board's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes each. Attention is called to the fact that the board is prohibited by law from taking any substantive action on matters discussed that are not on the agenda. And no adverse conclusion should be drawn if the board does not respond to the public comment at this time. It is requested that no comment be made during this period on items that are on today's agenda. Members of the public may comment on any items that are on today's agenda when the item is called and should notify the chair of their desire to address the board when that agenda item is called. With that, do we have any public comment at this time?
Mr. Chair, we have not received any comments and no hands are raised at the moment.
Okay, with that, I close the public comment period and move on to MCTC sitting as the Transportation Policy Committee. Item number 4, Transportation Consent Item. All items on the consent agenda are considered routine and non-controversial by MCTC staff and will be approved by one motion if no members of the committee or public wishes to comment or ask questions. If comment or discussion is desired by anyone, the item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered in the listed sequence with an opportunity for any members of the public to address the committee concerning the item before action is taken. With that, anybody wishes to pull any item from the consent or discuss further? Say none. With that, look for motion for items A through 4A through 4E.
Chair, I'll move to approve the consent item as presented.
Second.
I have first and a second, and can we have the roll call, please?
Commissioner Rodriguez.
Yes.
Commissioner Gallegos.
Yes.
Commissioner Poitras.
Yes.
Commissioner Rogers.
Yes.
Chair Ahmed.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 5, transportation action discussion item for 5A 2023 state budget and legislative update.
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, if we could take the next item. Gus Corey is running a little bit behind schedule and we'll take him when he joins us.
With that, we hold on to item number 5A, move on to item number 5B, draft 2024 into regional transportation improvement program, ITIP updated.
Yes, Mr. Chair, if we could combine item 5B and 5C, so we're not too repetitive. Item 5C is an action item, so we'll take action following the discussion of that item. We're glad and happy and excited to report that the draft ITIP was released and Madera fared very well in the draft ITIP as a proposal for State Route 99 to add additional funding on this current segment from 7 to 12, and then added environmental for 17 to 21, to begin that process and get that project into the program and hopefully, tap into some future grant funding opportunities to move the project forward. And then, our Madera Rail Station, the San Joaquin Valley Joint Powers Group Authority, $80 million. We have Dan Levitt here, and so that was a great yes, award if it finally gets approved in March. But I don't want to steal anyone's thunder.
Too late. Okay.
Oh, Jeff prepared. He's going to explain the process, the dates, the important dates. We went and testified, Supervisor Poitras testified at the hearing for this particular project and the rail project. And so, Jeff, if you could explain the RTIP and the ITIP and
Sure.
what the action item is.
Sure, this PowerPoint presentation that you have in front of you, it was set up for two different presentations, but I'm gonna kind of go over it because it's repetitive. It's all involved with the same thing. So basically, every 2 years, the state prepares the State Transportation Improvement Program. And part of that is the ITIP, the Interregional Transportation Improvement Program. And they make recommendations as Director Taylor mentioned, Madera fared very well. And we'll be receiving a lot of money, I think more money than we've ever received since I can recall. So as a part of this process, we have to adopt a document called the Regional Transportation Improvement Program. And that includes these new projects one of the new projects. Well, I guess I'm going to get ahead of myself here. So this basically covers, it's the 2024 ITIP, which becomes part of the STIP, the State Implementation Plan, that will get approved in March. So if we can go to the next slide. Just to briefly talk about the projects that she previously mentioned. This is the South Madera 6 lane 7 to 12. This is the existing project that we currently have. Caltrans needed an additional 5.5 million in ITIP funding for construction and construction support. This will make the project entirely whole and be ready for construction. And thank you. This is a new project that I know a lot of people have worked very hard in the valley to try to get this moving forward along with District 6. This is they've called it the North Madera 6 lane. This is from 17 to approximately Avenue 21. The funding for this is for $4.3 million and is going to fund the initial environmental phase. There have been discussions talking about future sources of potential funding for the additional phases. So that will be coming. So we're very excited about this, that a new segment's going to be added. Okay, the next one. This is the really big ticket item here. The high-speed rail stations, $80 million in ITIP funding for this project. It's for the high-speed rail. It's out Avenue 12. I don't know if Mr. Levitt will want to talk about this now or later during another item, but this is very exciting. This gives us the opportunity to create a full transit-oriented development within Madera County. So it's very exciting that this is going to happen. Okay, so next, this might be a little difficult to read. This shows the whole process from beginning to end, from when the California Transportation Commission adopts its fund estimate or releases it. Then we go through the ITIP process, and then after all of that information is presented, then we take that information and put it into our Regional Transportation Improvement Program. So the next item will be your consideration for that particular document. And then as it goes through, and then we have to provide this to the California Transportation Commission by December 15th. And then after that, it goes through the CTC process with adoption in March of 2024. So we're very hopeful and very excited. Okay, any questions on the ITIP itself? We go into. Okay, so can we go to the slide, please?
Before we move on to the RTIP, I didn't know if we wanted to give Dan, did you want to add any comments related to the Madera station? There was a lot of work involved in capturing the 80 million, and I thank Dan for all of his work that he has put into this effort and kind of guiding us and leading us through the Madera Station project.
Yeah, I really didn't prepare anything, but we're very excited about this. We've been working with you, with the county, with the city, Madera for some time now. First to relocate the San Joaquin station down to the Avenue 12 location, but this next step of getting the improvements needed for being able to have it ready to go for the early operating high-speed rail operations between Merced and Bakersfield is really key, making sure that we continue to have passenger rail service for the county, for the city, for the area, for the region. And this $80 million is absolutely critical. It allows us to leverage that funds. We have a federal application that we did with Caltrans. It's already out as well for the remaining funds. And then if that's not successful, we are putting in a TIRSIP application this March for the remaining funds. And that the state basically with this funding is on the hook to complete the funding for this. And so we feel like we're in a really good position to get what's needed to make sure that we're able to secure this station for the future of Madera.
Thank you. Beautiful. Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your support on this. We certainly could not have gotten this in there without all the support that you've given us over the years for this effort.
Fantastic. Thank you. Appreciate it. Muted enthusiasm.
Right.
Over $90 million.
I know.
Everybody's speechless.
Exactly.
Can't complain, right?
It's like
How many
pop
zeros?
champagne or something. Yeah.
And one thing I did forget to mention is that thank you to all of your local agencies in submitting letters of support for the proposed ITIP projects. So those have been sent and received by Caltrans and CTC. Okay, we'll go to the next slide, please. This is just a quick background. I previously mentioned this. We prepare the Regional Transportation Improvement Program every 2 years. And what we do within this program is this document, we include projects that have previously been funded that have not yet been completed for various reasons. Sometimes it's just environmental clearance or just last minute type projects. So some of the projects that are currently in the RTIP just being identified and noticed is that the Avenue 12 interchange, for example, that hasn't been entirely completed yet. The State Route 41 passing lanes, that's still going through some environmental mitigation. And the 12 to 17 section, that's getting close as well too. So what it also does is it includes the newer projects that I'll get to in a second here. So if we can go to the next slide. So somebody could probably explain this better than I can. And so when we have through the STIP fund estimate, the Madera region receives a certain amount of shares based on the available funding. And the STIP funding, it goes up some years and down other years. And so I think we're in a downward cycle right now. But in the past, we've been able to loan against future shares in order to complete certain projects. So finally now we're starting to get right back over the hump where we're not in negative, we're going into the positive territory. So by the next cycle, we should be in good shape. So for the particular cycle between through 28-29, there's going to be $1.7 million available. And that is reduced from the $525,000 that MCTC receives for planning, programming, and monitoring every 2 years. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is just, we're gonna I'm gonna run through these really quick because we've already spoken about these. Planning, program, and monitoring. This is what we use for MCTC to do all of the different types of state funding projects that we work on, and for the different programming and monitoring. So this number is established by the California Transportation Commission. So we put this into the RTIP as a line item.
And it's spread across 4 years.
4 years, right. It's not just 1 year, it's spread across 4 years. And it's a very complicated formula that seems to change every step cycle. And then some of that gets carried forward and moves forward, so. Okay, so the next slide, this is again, this is included as an existing current project in the RTIP, because they haven't started construction yet, so this will probably be in the next probably 2 or 3 RTIPs, I would assume, through clearance and mitigation after the fact. So they're requesting $5.5 million for the construction and construction support. The next project is the North Madera 6 lane, $4.3 million for the environmental phase. This is brand new to the Regional Transportation Improvement Program. One of the pieces of the RTIP that has not been completed yet is it's a benefit cost analysis, and Caltrans is working on that as we speak. So that will be added to the approved document after it's completed. I believe it's by the end of this week or early next week. So we're in good shape with that. Okay, so the next project or next we'll talk about is this just talks about how we determine what the dollar amounts are available. Right now, it's only being used for PPM that are currently in the STIP. The ITIP funding has been added with the existing and new project. And we're required to submit this to California Transportation Commission by December 15th. And they will adopt this in March. There's one item to point out that we've done in the past. In the resolution, the board grants authority to the executive director to make any edits or modifications to the document, such as adding the new BCA calculations, or if they CTC has a paragraph or something they want changed. So that's part of the resolution before you. So that concludes the brief presentation. Be happy to accept any questions.
There's an action.
Yes. Any question from the commission?
Mr. Chair, I just want to point out that in the draft report provided by the Madera County Transportation Commission, you know, it really shows other funding sources that were provided for this one of the projects with the 6 lanes from 7 to 12. And I couldn't help but notice that the Measure T contribution to that was only $9,000. So to leverage $112 million, I mean, I think that's a drop in the bucket to be able to get that kind of funding, to be able to provide projects like this for our community, right? And not necessarily the State Route 99, but much need. These are the pinch points that exist throughout our valley. So I just want to point that out. I know a lot of times we're fast to point the concerns about Measure T, but really what we're using them for is really to leverage a lot more millions of dollars for projects like these. So I just wanted to make sure and highlight that.
Any other questions? Thank you. Anybody from the public? No?
They've received no comments for this item and no hands are raised.
Thank you. With that, I look for a motion.
Move for approval.
Yes.
I'll second.
First and a second, can we have the roll call, please?
Commissioner Poitras,
Yes.
Commissioner Rodriguez,
Yes.
Commissioner Gallegos,
Yes.
Commissioner Rogers,
Yes.
Chair Ahmed.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries.
And now we move on to back to 5.8, 5.8,
Yes.
okay, which is the 2023 state budget and legislative update.
Yes, and with this afternoon is Gus Corey, and he's going to provide us a budget update and where we're headed. So Gus.
Thank you so much, Director Taylor, and good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. Gus Corey, State Legislative Advocate for MCTC. Apologize for the delay. I think it actually works out well because the previous presentations give maybe a little bit of context into what's going on to set up my report. So as far as where we are in the legislative process, so the legislature adjourned way back on September 14th. Governor Newsom had until October 14th to sign or veto legislation. So We've been working with state agencies to kind of see what the forecast is for next year's budget and some of the opportunities so that we can keep capitalizing on leveraging some of these state opportunities that Member Rodriguez had laid out. So the state this year had a $31.5 billion general fund deficit. They were able to paper that over in June, but it was predicated upon the collection of $42 billion worth of tax receipts. So that's personal income tax, corporate taxes, and even capital gains. And there had been 2 extensions. So the first extension was October 16th. That was then pushed to November 16th. And to date, in talking to Treasurer Ma about 2 weeks ago, she mentioned she had met with the Policy Council and said that we had only collected about 18 billion out of the 42 billion that was expected. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that the current year budget deficit doesn't grow. And on top of that, there's a forecast of a $14 billion deficit for fiscal year 24-25. So we were very fortunate to receive some general fund augmentations due to the unprecedented surpluses over the last 2 fiscal years. Essentially in 22-23, there was a $97.5 billion surplus. In fiscal year 21-22, there was a $76 billion surplus. And that's what made it possible for us to get our share of the $5 billion of the Senate Bill 125 funds. The TIRCIP program was funded at a record $3.6 billion. Cycle 7 is going to be $800 million. The active transportation program for cycle 7 was provided with, cycle 6 was provided with the $1 billion augmentation, making it a $1.5 billion program. It's now going to be $500 million for cycle 7 without any additional state legislative resources coming to fruition. And so we're going to have to get creative, and we've done a really good job of that as a region in working with our partners at Caltrans, CalSTA, and the legislature to see what can we do to build the momentum, build out our infrastructure, help with mobility, and respond to climate change. And so I'll be working with Director Taylor and staff on a draft state legislative platform. Just a couple ideas that have come to mind as I speak to others. So sorry, my 2-year-old just barged in. Hey, so sorry about that. She might as well say hi while she's here. So all right. Sorry about that. And so a couple opportunities. Supervisor Porthras, through his work on working with the Road User Task Force, is well aware of having to convert over from the gas tax to something else, a successor fee like the mileage-based user fee. In Senate Bill 1, we have the vehicle registration fee. That's something that our region had advocated for because it takes into account electric vehicles, which are now comprising 24% of all vehicle sales. And then there's just a incompatibility with saying that we want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but yet we're still dependent upon petroleum to fund our infrastructure. And so just a quick preview. I did some quick math, and I can go over it later once we draft up our platform. But if we were just to convert the 59-cent gas tax into a vehicle registration fee addition and spread that out, 87% of all drivers or registered vehicles would actually see a reduction in what they pay. So I thought that was pretty interesting. We're talking to the administration about that just to see what their appetite is. In addition, there are some existing resources. There's truck weight fees, which the state collects. This is about $1.4 billion. It always used to go to transportation. Then back in 2011, the Department of Finance decided to use these resources to pay down general obligation bond debt service, which really turned things like Proposition 1B, even the High-Speed Rail Bond Act, which was supposed to be an obligation to the general fund, into a revenue bond. So there's a way to maybe shave off some money there, again, to keep us whole. The STIP is projected to decline in the 2026 cycle. And that just matters more to small counties like ourselves. We're not Los Angeles, where we have the population and the multiple sales tax measures that generate $1 billion a year, where, you know, getting state money is gravy. So these are the types of issues that we're hoping to tackle, again, to get creative. And then just legislatively, as there's more intention on trying to adhere to CAPTI, the governor's climate action plan for transportation infrastructure, just, you know, looking for opportunities to where it's not a one size fits all prescription, if you will. How do we remain competitive in the grant programs? How do we play defense against some legislation that might, you know, put us at a disadvantage? So I'll look forward to furthering those conversations with staff and the board, and hopefully bring something for your consideration early next year, preferably after the governor's release of the fiscal year 24-25 state budget is introduced, and that happens on January 10th. So, Mr. Chair, I'll stop right there. Oh, one other note. For those that aren't aware, and we just recently hosted the Transportation Commission. She was not an attendee, but Michelle Martinez has resigned her position. And so Governor Newsom will have an opportunity to fill that vacancy. She went and took a job as a city manager for California City out in San Bernardino County, I believe. So I'll stop right there, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to take any questions or comments that commissioners may have.
Any question?
Mr. Chair, if I may, Gus, if I heard you correctly, you said 24% are electric vehicles. Now, the proposition that's been tossed around to the governor is to find a formula to see how we can continue to collect in lieu of the gas tax, right? I'm assuming that what's been proposed, if you don't mind me asking, I know that we were trying to tie that to vehicles miles traveled, but I'm not sure if that's, or you said something about the registration fees. I'm kind of curious if you can elaborate on that, please.
Absolutely. So in Senate Bill 1, there's a tiered fee that's imposed based on the valuation of the vehicle. So it's not the vehicle license fee, which is just a straight percentage on the vehicle. And that doesn't go to transportation. That goes to local governments for general fund purposes. This is just a flat registration fee. So half the cars in this state are worth less than $5,000, believe it or not. And so those vehicles only pay $25 as an addition. I believe 87% of all vehicles are worth less than $20,000. I have to double check that figure, but they pay $50. So whatever is between $5,000 and $20,000, they pay a $50 fee. And so it's capped at $175 as an add-on. So the state imposed gas tax, the aggregate state imposed gas tax is 59 cents. And so if you were just to do a conversion, the current vehicle registration fee generates $1.7 billion. And that's what funds the Senate Bill 1 competitive programs. So that's the local partnership program, trade corridor enhancement program, solutions for congested corridors program. And then it also gives money to TIRSIP. Also, it supplements what the cap and trade program provides for TIRSIP. And so, you know, the vehicle registration fee is agnostic on fuel source. It's just if you have a registered car in this state, you pay. Whereas a mileage-based user fee, and again, I would defer to Supervisor Porthos on this, but there are some concerns, even if it's a revenue neutral proposition, about the impact of disadvantaged communities, folks that have to drive further to get to work or educational opportunities. And so the vehicle registration fee is more of a progressive method of collection because, again, it's based on the valuation of a vehicle. And then as cars, you know, depreciate, you fall into the lower tier. So you wind up paying less as a result. And there's a portion, I believe, that even is tax deductible. So we have precedent with Senate Bill 1. And so maybe looking at a, you know, conversion could provide us with more predictable, stable funding and not make us susceptible to, the dips, because Senate Bill 1 does contain an inflationary adjustment to the gas tax, but even that's not keeping up with the pace of the purchasing power that we need in order to, leverage our measured dollars against to get things funded. So.
Thank you. And I think with the demand that's being requested on folks to convert, obviously that still leaves that gap, right? Because not everybody has a fossil fuel vehicle. So therefore there's a void, so to speak, and I can see how that'll affect communities such as ours, especially with funding. More importantly, like you said, I think the folks, the disadvantaged communities are the ones that are impacted the most because it's them that's funding. They commute the most, right? So they're the ones paying the most. So no, I appreciate that. Do you have an idea as to when we may be able to see something like this come before the governor? And how soon we may be able to see something like this transition or convert?
So I think the first step is we need to have a more robust conversation with the policy council. And, my thought process there is, given that our region is in a non-attainment air, district, some of our MPO sister agencies have struggled with getting their SCSs certified, which is a prerequisite to us qualifying to apply for state funds. Even with Senate Bill 1, we were the ones that brought forward to the table that SB 1 should be more than just a fix it first proposition. And the introduction of the VRF made it possible to fund multimodal things like passenger rail service and, even for transit operations. So, what I'm hoping is that gives us more credibility. And so that's kind of my hope. And so again, we need further dialogue, but the Central Coast is also looking at this as a opportunity. And the incoming Senate President Pro Tem, Mike McGuire, who represents the North Bay and is really passionate about, doing whatever we can in order to realize our climate goals. He's had some interest in this as well. So it's out there, and, it doesn't have to be the solution, but it's just something else to consider. And I would draw upon, again, others that have been participating in other forums, to contribute to see how do we be more proactive about, acquiring that stability, because as we know, it's hard in order to put transportation projects together. They take a long time to come to fruition. And if you don't have predictability, then it's like a house of cards. It just makes it that much more difficult.
Thank you. So what I got out of this is just purchase a lower valued car, right?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, thank you. And thank you, Gus, for that, those comments. When there's, the devil's in the details in all these proposals, and, the deal with the electric cars, right now they're paying a certain fee for their road use, but it's not based on the amount of miles that they travel. I mean, you could have somebody who's got their car parked in their garage and drives 2,000 to 3,000 miles a year versus somebody who drives 30,000 to 40,000 miles a year, and they're paying the same thing if you've got an electric car. But obviously the guy that's going 30,000 to 40,000 miles is burning up the road more than the other guy. So there's but what I like to ask staff to do is and I'd be willing to help you out is I think it'd be interesting to have somebody from our TAC make a presentation from the CTC, through Zoom or something. Yeah, about the user charge and that way of provide, some of the work that's been done. I mean, it's at our last meeting, there was a presentation put together by one of our members who was a faculty member at one of the schools, and it was pretty progressive as far as some of her suggestions. There was a lot of nuances and a lot of details and a lot of technicalities, and I think that we pressed from day one to keep it simple, stupid. I mean, it's going to be difficult enough for people to transfer from, paying at the pump to some kind of a user charge or whatever. So it's there's still a lot of moving parts, but again, something that could be kept simple is something that we're continuing to look at.
Yeah.
And I would agree, Mr. Chair, if we, that was a good idea to have at least this body to really be familiar with the process and how these details are spelled out in these propositions.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I just, again, this is very preliminary, but if it's appropriate, I can maybe share my screen and just kind of show you some of the figures, if folks are interested.
Everybody's really interested.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, this was like a mini email that I did. Okay, so just this first chart here shows you, this is exactly what folks are paying right now. This is the tiered system that I was referring to. So vehicles under 5,000 pay $25. That comprises 46% of all vehicles in the state. If you're under, sorry, I misspoke. It's 25,000, not 20,000. 5 to 24,999. So 87% of all cars are valued at less than $25,000 in the state. And so what I did was just some quick math on, based on the consumption that's produced by the California Energy Commission, what does the 59 cents mean as far as, consumption? Like, what would that equate to? And it's roughly $224 per vehicle is what's being paid. And so if you go down here and you factor in the full conversion, that person that was paying $25, they're paying $112.50. But when you factor in the $224 that they're no longer paying at the pump, it's a $136.50 savings annually for them, $49 savings for people in the next tier. So 87% of all registered vehicle owners get a rebate. And I guess, the person that buys that Tesla might hate me for this. And I think, as Supervisor Porthris mentioned, and I would be remiss in not mentioning this, under Senate Bill 1, folks that purchase an electric vehicle have a $100 charge that they currently pay. But like I said, I think this is a fairly small fraction, and this is at the extreme end. So again, it's just food for thought. It's conceptual at this point. I think, this year I've just have been talking to various folks about wanting to be more intentional at being at the table, so that we're not just always reacting to policies that come before us. And it takes so much more work to then get in the room to give our perspective. So if this is a construct that members are comfortable with, I would like to engage our legislative delegation. Senator Ana Caballero has been a really big advocate, especially in looking at the discrepancy of the implications of vehicle miles traveled. I think, as Supervisor Porthris said, there's some folks that drive an EV and they don't drive very much, but there's some that don't have the luxury of being able to purchase an electric vehicle and they have to drive further. So, you may not solve all the problems, but, ultimately we're going to have to stop the bleeding because we can't fund the infrastructure ourselves. And I mean, just as a reminder, these are state assets, 4199. These are state assets that we're supplementing funding to. So I hope that was helpful.
Thank you. That was helpful. Any other question?
I'll hold on to those comments, but yeah, it seems like they're almost incentivizing you to buy a cheap vehicle.
Yeah.
And I mean, at 24,000, I don't know what's out there. I mean, I think even your cheapest EV is probably starting at 30,000. So I find it pretty hard to align to that, but I do understand that the majority, 80%, especially based on those numbers, probably fall under that assessed values.
That's why it's so unpopular. Nobody wants to take on to this.
Mhm.
Not incentivizing it,
Yeah.
for sure.
Right. Any other questions? Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you for the update. Thank you.
And that was just informational, and now we move on to item number 5D, which is proposed SB 125 Transit Program Project List and Funding Allocation for the Madera region.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. I have prepared a brief presentation to kind of summarize all the events that we've been engaged in to date. And today we are asking for an action. We're asking to approve the Senate Bill 125 Transit Program Regional Project List and funding allocations by resolution, and also direct staff to submit an initial allocation package to the California State Transportation Agency by December 31st of 2020.
There we go.
So Senate Bill 125, it's providing $5.1 billion to fund transformative capital improvements to modernize California's intercity transit, commuter, ferry and rail systems through a formula-based transit and intercity rail capital program, which we'll call TIRCIP for short, and a new zero emission transit capital program. We'll call that ZETSIP for short. The TIRCIP has $4 billion over the next 2 fiscal years to fund high priority transit capital projects. And the ZETSIP has $1.1 billion over the next 4 fiscal years to fund zero emission vehicles and refueling infrastructure. Next slide, please. So the main objectives of the funding are to provide a one-time multi-year bridge funding for transit operators to address operational costs until they figure out a long-term solution. Also to assist transit operators in preventing service cuts and also to help increase ridership. And also to prioritize the availability of transit for riders who are transit dependent. And also to prioritize transit agencies that represent a significant percentage of the region's ridership. And also these funds are intended to provide a direct benefit to disadvantaged communities and priority populations, which that includes low-income communities and low-income households. Next slide, please. Okay. So all capital projects under these 2 programs, they have to increase ridership and also reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Other policy objectives include integration with the high-speed rail system and also improving transit safety. Eligible projects under this program is very broad. It can include rail capital projects, integrated ticketing, scheduling systems, bus rapid transit, van pool, microtransit services, large-scale deployment of zero-emission vehicles, and also the technologies to support them. The funds can also be used for transit operation expenditures to help reduce or to help prevent the reduction of service. Next slide, please. So funding distributions will be made only to regional transportation planning agencies, or the RTPAs. And since MCTC is the RTPA for the Madera region, then the funds will be directly dispersed to MCTC. Once the allocation package has been approved, then the funding will be directly transferred to us, and then we'll in turn make the funding available to the public agencies. Next slide, please. So the Madera County region has the potential to receive $18 million, and that's a great amount for our region. If you see on the table, in year 1, we have with the combine of the TIRCIP and the ZETSIP funding, we could receive about $9 million in year 1. In year 2, about $8.7 million. And then in year 3 and then in year 4, you'll see that the TIRCIP drops off and it's just the ZETSIP funding there. And so it'll be about $400,000 for years 3 and 4 for that total of 18 million. Next slide, please. So before we take a look at the proposed projects, I just want to say that it's the intention of the program that all of the local agencies collaborate as a region to come up with the projects that would utilize these funds. And so in harmony with that, MCTC staff, along with the transit staff from the cities of Madera and Chowchilla, the county, and also with the San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority. We met on multiple occasions to come up with a regional. We also received some guidance from the state, and all of the agencies mentioned, as well as representatives from Caltrans District 6, met with California State Transportation Agency, or CalSTA, earlier this week to receive guidance on this program, for them to review our project list and also to just get general technical assistance with the program requirements. So as we know, all public transit agencies, they're required to gradually transition to 100% zero emission bus fleet. And so these SB 125 funds can really help with that. So part of the process in developing this plan involved, each agency looking at their existing funds over the next 5 years, determining how much of the SB 125 funding would be needed to help meet the requirements and also to fill the funding gaps. So the local agencies weren't limited on the amount of funding that they could request, as long as the proposed projects were eligible under the program and also aligned with the program goals. So we're happy to say that we were able to accommodate all of the local agencies' requests in their full entirety. So let's go over each agency's proposed allocations. Okay, so first off, just right off the top was MCTC. We can receive 1% of the total funding, which is about $188,000. And that's just for administering the program. We are tasked with preparing and implementing an initial short-term financial plan. We're also tasked with a long-term financial plan that we have to develop for the region under this program. So the state has already designated how much funds we could have, and that's the figure that you see there. Next slide, please. The county, Madera County. The county is requesting $3.5 million to assist with its transit electrification project, funding the purchase and installation of electric buses, vehicle chargers, and related charging infrastructure. This will enable the county to complete federal and state requirements to convert its transit fleet into zero-emission buses. The county is also planning extensive marketing to help increase awareness of these efforts in the hopes of increasing ridership, which will also help to reduce vehicle emissions countywide. Next slide, please. The city of Chowchilla. So the city of Chowchilla is requesting $1.7 million to help the region reach the state's goal of reducing carbon emissions by 2030. The city plans to modernize and improve its transportation system by upgrading the fare collection system to a mobile or a contactless solution, and by purchasing 2 electric buses along with the required charging infrastructure. Next slide, please. So the city of Madera is requesting $500,000 in ZETSIP funding for the future purchase of electric vehicles and then the required charging stations. The city is proposing to update the existing Madera Metro transit system with a full or a hybrid microtransit system. That this proposal is going to be brought before the Madera City Council at the December 6th meeting. And if that's approved, then the city foresees purchasing several electric vehicles and implementing a pilot microtransit program. Next slide, please. Okay, so the San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority is requesting a minimum of $8 million in TIRSIP funding for phase 1 of the Madera Station relocation or the Madera High-Speed Rail Station. So this funding will help mitigate cost escalations and also support the construction of improvements, which will be utilized initially by the San Joaquins, but then by the high-speed rail passengers once the future Madera High-Speed Rail Station begins its operations. And so this funding will help make sure that the project also stays on schedule because it's scheduled to be completed by mid-2025. The state expects that existing TIRSIP projects that are already substantially funded and in need of additional resources for completion will be prioritized over beginning new projects. And so because the Madera Rail Station relocation is an existing TIRSIP project, then it's in line with the SB 125 program goals to prioritize funding for it. An added benefit of that, though, is that the requirements for requesting the funding for this project is a lot simpler. because it's an existing project, an existing TRSA project. We also wanted to mention, though, that after all of the local agencies' requests had been accommodated, then we were able to add about 4 million more to this project. So that brings the total to 12.8 million instead of the 8 million that the San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority requested. Next slide, please. So there's the proposed regional allocations in its entirety. Summarizing it, MCTC, about 188,000 for program administration. The San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority for the Madera Rail Project, about 12.8 million. The Madera County to help with its transit electrification project, 3.5 million. The city of Chowchilla to help modernize and update its transportation system, 1.7 million. And the city of Madera to help with its electrification program and hybrid microtransit system, 500,000, for a total of 18 million for the whole region. Next slide, please. So let's go over where we are in the timeline for this program. As you can see, this program has kept us very busy over the last few months, starting in September when the final program guidelines were published. We met multiple times with the local agencies to go over those program guidelines and also to figure out a plan for spending the funds. On November 10th is when we asked the local agencies to submit to us their funding requests, and now we're here presenting that plan to you. A very important deadline is coming up, though, as you can see highlighted in red, December 31st. That's when we have to submit an initial allocation package to CalSTA. And so once that package has been approved by CalSTA, then our first year funds can be awarded no later than April 30th of 2024. So next slide. So I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you may have. And I should mention that some local staff, I think they might be online from Chowchilla. Also, we have Monty Cox from the county here to discuss his proposed projects if needed. And also, as you've heard, we have Dan Levitt from the San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority here as well.
Any representation for the city of Madera?
I'm not sure.
Not from the transit, Ellen Bitter's online, but no one from transit.
I'm just curious to ask, obviously when I see these numbers, I'm always curious to see how the city, were they involved in requesting additional funds, or was this the only projects that they had? And maybe it's a question that I'll ask my staff. Obviously when I see the numbers, I go, okay, I would think that a city of closer to 65,000 would have a lot more need for especially with projects like these. So that was a question.
Yeah, and just to add a little note is that the Madera Station funding project is region-wide, so I think that we're all going to benefit from investing in a Madera Station project as well. So maybe that they saw that as an opportunity to kind of,
More so like electrifying vehicles, kind
Yeah.
of like, what I see in Chowchilla, trying to
Yeah.
purchase out more of these electric vehicles to
Right.
try to make those transitions.
Councilmember, if I may partly answer your question, I think part of the request to the agencies was to have them look at all of their funding sources and then to identify what is the gap in the transition to the electric. And that's where this SB 125 funding can help with. And so that's where I think we saw the request is the city of Madera does have various transit funding sources. And so what our assumption was that they were going to be using those other funding sources as well.
First, yeah.
As first is in the transforming to the electric system. And so we had the same question. We've had discussions. That was what was requested, and I guess it is what it is. So feel free to talk to your staff.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Any question from the commissioner this time? None. Thank you for the presentation and it's action item. And with that said, look for a motion.
I'll move for approval.
I have a first and
Second.
Second,
And who was the second? I'm sorry.
Jose.
Councilmember.
So can I have the roll call?
Certainly. Commissioner Poitras,
Yes.
Commissioner Rodriguez.
Yes.
Commissioner Gallegos,
Yes.
Commissioner Rogers,
Yes.
Chair Ahmed.
Yes.
Thank you, motion carries.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. That was great. Thank you. With that, moving on to item number 5E, Transportation Funding Program. As information and discussion item.
Item, you'll see some of the programs that Troy was just referring to with other funding opportunities as well.
Yes. So in years past, we've had this presentation and the feedback from the commissioners has always been positive, like, oh, thank you. So that way I know what I can follow up on with my staff on what are the funding sources, what are the projects? And so this is just to give a brief summary of overview and reminder of what are those funding sources, where are we at in some of that, in that progress, but also just cash on hand and what are the funding opportunities that we have. And so I think to talk about any, when we talk about money or funding sources, we have to kind of understand, what is going on in the world. So just briefly, on the next slide, we have to understand, of course, inflation. And we are all dealing with inflation on a personal level, but our agencies are also dealing with inflation on delivering projects. The cost of delivering the projects, even basic, maintenance and operations, but also large projects has escalated tremendously. And so we have to keep identifying, sources to keep paying for those projects, paying for maintenance to maintain our system. Next slide. The other question we have to ask ourselves, specifically with Measure T and other funding sources is, where are we at? And so these are some of the current articles that you've seen, maybe you've seen in some of the, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes. Are we going to have a recession or are we going to have a soft landing? Where are we at? And so we have to take these into account in our projections and forecasting, and they do have impacts on our transportation funding programs, and specifically the sales tax collection. Next slide. And then just as a reminder, we do have the federal transportation bill, the IJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and then the Rebuilding California is the state implementation of a lot of these federal programs. And so there are primarily federal programs that are available that we're looking at. They're primarily discretionary. And so we need to be prepared to try and get our fair share of those funds. Next slide. And so this next slide is really what I like to call the meat and potatoes of our local transportation funding programs. These are the programs that MCTC controls or administers and have as we work directly with your local agencies. And the first one is CMAQ, and then we have the carbon reduction program. We have the Regional Service Transportation Program. We have the STIP, as was talked about earlier. We have the Transportation Development Act. We have the Low Carbon Transit Program, and then a couple of SB1 programs. We have the SB 125 program, which we just heard about, and of course, Measure T. So next slide. So these are some of the programs that are not administered or controlled by MCTC. And so a lot of your local agencies will work directly with the federal government or the state government to access these programs. Quite a few of these are transit programs, are transit funding programs that MCTC is not involved with. And so as you look at these programs, one question you could go as you go back to your staff is, have we applied for these or what's the status? Do we have any type of projects that use these funding sources? And where are we at with those projects and with those funds? And then specifically, next slide, as we go and talk about some of these specific programs, CMAQ, just as a reminder, these are federal funds to help contribute to attainment of national air quality standards. They have to provide air quality benefits in order to be eligible. Next slide. Our apportionment for 23-24 was about 2.1 million. So every year our region gets around $2 million to help implement these type of projects that reduce emissions, that help improve air quality. There is a requirement that they have to obligate these funds within 3 years. And so there's a time element to these. For 22-23, the net obligation for our region was about just a little over 2 million. And the last 5 years combined, our region has obligated about 5.2, but we could have obligated approximately over 10 million. And so we do have capacity, we do have allocations that need to be spent. We do have, and we have projects on the list. And so one encouragement that I always give when I give these presentations is to ask your staff, what are our CMAQ projects? Where are we at? Are we moving forward? Are we delivering them? And we did recently conduct a call for projects. We received 46 applications for about 38 million. We only had about 8 or 9 million in capacity to program. And so those projects are in the process of being reviewed and scored. We'll be meeting with this scoring committee soon. And the potential award list will be brought back before this board for approval. And then those will be programmed in the next federal transportation improvement program that will be approved by the federal government next December, and then they can move forward with those new projects. Next slide. Just as a reminder, we have what we call the RSDP funds. These are flexible funding. They're for federal aid highway and bridge and tunnel projects. They could also be used for transit or ped and bike projects. A lot of our local agencies use these for either major rehab projects or just local street road maintenance on eligible highways. Because we are a smaller county population wise, we can exchange those funds with the state to receive state funds, which gives us more flexibility. And so we actually have those funds on hand, meaning MCTC controls those funds. And so they're easily accessible if these need to be delivered. Our apportionment for last year was 2.1 million. The next slide. Cash on hand was about 5.3. So as you can see, we have several years worth of funds on hand in projects. Now, there are projects programmed against these funds. Where are we at in the delivery? Next slide. This was talked about earlier by Jeff. These are the regional improvement funds. We call the RIP funds. And the current project, as was discussed, was the Avenue 7 to Avenue 12. And then we're just currently going through the process. You earlier approved the RTIP document that we'll submit to the state. And then the next funding availability will be in 2026 cycle. And then one of the new projects to highlight is the 17 to 21 99 widening. And so we anticipate in the next cycle to potentially program some RIP funds on a 99 project, probably 1721. Stay tuned for that. But that's probably what will happen. And the next slide, TDA, Transportation Development Act. These are funded by 0.25%. Sales tax comes back to our region for the state sales tax for the local transportation fund. They primarily fund transit, but they also can fund street and road projects after all transit needs are met. That's why we have our unmet transit needs process every year with our public hearing. We do that so we can spend money on street and road projects. We received about 6.5 million this last year. And as of June 30th, our unexpended balance was 10.1 million. So again, we have a significant amount of funds still on hand that are available. And these are programmed, but what's the status of delivering these projects? Next project or the next funding source is LC Top. Has to do with transits funded from the state's greenhouse gas reduction fund or cap and trade. We received about 1.8 million in allocations from the last 8 years or so. The cash on hand was 1.2 as of September 30th. So again, where's the delivery of the projects? They do have 4 years to complete the project. There's 6 projects currently on the list that are being looked at and being funded. SB1 SGR, so next slide, state of good repairs, one of the state SB1 programs. Our allocation for this year was 263,000. Cash on hand as of June 30th was 1.2 million, almost 1.3 million. And if you can see again, several years worth of money. Where's the delivery of these transit capital projects? And we're just holding these funds, and we'd love to get these monies reimbursed to your local agencies for the projects. The next slide, SB 125 was talked about today, so I won't spend too much time on that, but that is a new one that we're going to add on a list that we'll be tracking for future reports and presentations of where we at on accessing those funds and spending those funds. And then, of course, we have Measure T. To date, through November, we've received a little over 163 million in sales tax receipts. There's 23 receipts for 16.2 million. Of that, about a little over 8 million went to the local agencies. We've conservatively estimated that we've leveraged over 319 million so far against those funds, which is almost a 2-to-1 ratio for Measure T. As of June 30th, member agencies reported unaudited cash balances of those amounts that you see there. And as you can see, there's about 31.5 million that was reported cash on hand for projects. And so again, what is the status of delivery of our projects that we have Measure T funds against? I know some of them are on larger projects that do take time. Some of them have railroad issues. Some of them have the utility issues and relocation issues sometimes creep up that delay projects. But again, there is cash on hand to support projects. The next program, SB1, the local partnership program. This is kind of tied into the Measure T because we have to do a 1-to-1 match with our sales tax measure. Through 2017 to 2022, we got about 1.6 million. The last 2 years, we've received a little over 3 million. So we've got, almost $2.4 million since the beginning of the program. And there's some of the projects that we've completed or working on are the Avenue 7 rehab, various rehab locations in the city of Madera, the Orange Avenue 6th Street rehab, and then Chowchilla is working on the Chowchilla Boulevard rehab project. And then we've also on the competitive side, just as a reminder, we received the 5 million in competitive funds for the Oakhurst Midtown Connector project that was completed. And we're going to be seeking funds, competitive funds for the 233 interchange project in the next cycle. Our hope is to have a great application to leverage our Measure T funds to do a good project there in Chowchilla. And then just really quick on some of the regional program update, just some upcoming projects, just like I mentioned, the 233, the planning and engineering and right-of-way phases will be beginning soon on that project, which is exciting. Some City Madera projects will be coming up soon, the Cleveland Avenue and Gateway Avenue widening projects. And then we'll be working on the draft strategic plan update for the next few months that will be coming early next year. So we'll be having some discussions with the board here on how we programming the last few years of the measure. And do we have any leftover funds? Where do we put those funds? And how do we deliver all the fun of these projects that we currently have programmed? And then this is just a fun picture of recent on the ribbon cutting for the Road 200 bridge projects. And so we love to go to those. Those are fun. So I'm available for any questions in there. As also, I know previously we provided, it's called Transportation Funding in California documents produced by Caltrans in the state. It gives a very good overview of some of the stuff I talked about, but also just how state funding and transportation funding works in general. It's great information and help understand the complexities of transportation funding. If you would like to have that, either a hard copy or electronic copy, please let me know. We can get those to you. With that, I can take any questions.
Any questions from the commission? Thank you. Great presentation. Thank you. Now moving on to MCTC sitting as the Madera County Transportation Commission. Item number 6, reaffirm all action taken while sitting as the Transportation Policy Committee. Administrative consent item. All items on the consent agenda are considered routine and non-controversial by MCTC staff and will be approved by one motion. If no member of the committee or public wishes to comment or ask questions, if comments or discussion is desired by anyone, the item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered in the listed sequence with an opportunity for any members of the public to address the committee concerning the item before action is taken.
So Mr.
But
Chair,
we
if you
take the motion
back
to
to item
reaffirm.
6 to reaffirm all actions.
I'll move that we reaffirm.
A second.
We have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Nay. Ayes have it. Thank you. And with the administrative consent item. And as I said, anybody like to remove or further discuss that item from the consent?
Move to approve.
I have a first and do you have a second?
Second.
First and a second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nays? Ayes have it, thank you. And now item number 8, administrative action discussion, item 8A, award contract. Meal performance audits. I want to just stand there.
This item is to award a contract to complete the triennial performance audits. MCTC is statutorily required to make a performance audit of its activities and the activities of each operator to whom it allocates Transportation Development Act funds. An RFP procurement process was conducted and 4 proposals were received. The scoring committee recommends retaining Moore and Associates to conduct the audits in an amount not to exceed $38,000. It is anticipated that the audits will be brought before this board at the February 2024 meeting. Staff recommends approval, and I can answer any questions.
Any questions? Say none, move to approve. I have a first, you have a second. First and a second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nays? Ayes have it, thank you. Now, sitting as a MCTC, sitting as the Madera County 2006 Transportation Authority. Item number 9, authority administrative consent item. All items on the consent agenda are considered to be routine and non-controversial by MCTC staff and will be approved by one motion. If no members of the authority or public wishes to comment or ask question, if comment or discussion is desired by anyone, the item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered in the listed sequence with an opportunity for any members of the public to address the authority concerning the item before action is taken. I have a first, do I have a second?
Second.
First and a second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nay? Ayes have it, thank you very much. Moving on to item number 10, authority action discussion items. Item 10A, measure T renewal update polling survey results.
Today we have Dave Metz joining us. I don't know if Kendall, if you wanted to introduce Dave and then give your update first or follow Dave after, and she's going to provide us an update on where we are with the Measure T renewal process. Kendall.
Hi, everybody. I'm just glad to be here. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Troy's gonna put a presentation up for me, or can you put your presentation up for me?
Sandy's got it.
Sandy's got it up for me. Okay. I'm gonna be relatively brief because I do want to allocate the majority of time for Dave to really go over the polling results. But I wanted to bring the board up to speed on what's been happening since we last spoke. We've had a number of presentations throughout the county. Go to the next slide there. There we go. This is just some of them. We've actually had quite a few since then. In the next slide, you'll see we've been actually trying to really target a number of the community groups, community-based organizations, as well as school districts. And we're finding that the school districts, frankly, are very interested in Measure T once they understand the connection between safe routes to schools and how that might impact them. And just as a side note, it's not just the consultant team that's having these presentations and discussion, but also staff is taking advantage of those opportunities as well. As Executive Director Trisha was telling us, she's had an opportunity just yesterday, I think, to talk with some folks about first responders, schools, and how they might use Measure T funds to be more effective in preventing things that we don't want to happen. In other words, we want to make it safe for the kids to go to school. If you go to the next slide here, I have also want to point out that one of our supervisors made it possible for us to make a presentation as part of the District 5 Town Hall meeting. And there were about 40-50 people out there. It was a really good opportunity to talk about Measure T and other projects in the region, in that particular case, specifically SR 41. If any member of the board or any elected official would like us to make presentations at other events, we are certainly interested in doing that. And we felt this is a really good way to spend some quality time in the community, and thank the supervisor for that opportunity. The next thing I want to talk about really is our steering committee. We are still looking for 2 members from District 3 and District 4, but I did want to make sure everyone understood that we are moving forward with this and that we have been very successful with the first meeting. Look at the next slide here. We actually did have our first committee meeting on the 14th. These people don't all agree. I want to be very specific about that. In many cases, they were not very fond of each other. However, I want to assure the board that this group has come together in a very unique way. They've all signed agreements to ensure that we're going to conduct these meetings in a positive, professional, respectful, and hopefully collaborative way that will actually yield results. I think that the feedback that we got after the first meeting was exceptionally positive. We asked the group also to do a quick exercising using $100 and to distribute that from various things they might want to see investments made in with Measure T. It was very interesting how close to consensus they came right out of the gate. So I must assure you there will be more spirited conversations in the months ahead, but the first one was very successful. And if you go to the next slide here, this Saturday, we're doing something very different. And I would like to thank Monty, who's here today, the county. We are taking a road trip. So our steering committee, representatives from the county and MCTC staff will be taking the steering committee on a tour of the county. We're going to all 5 supervisorial districts so that people can understand the differences and see visually types of roads, types of pavement condition, where we have schools that might have something that's needed, examples of roadways that are not maintained, those that are, because what we found is most people are very interested in what's they know in their own community, but they may not be as aware of what's happening in others. Again, I was very pleased that the group was very excited about that. We'll be providing lunch and they're giving us 4 hours on a Saturday during the holidays. So I took that as a really positive thing. We'll be meeting in January, February, and March to move forward in terms of actually coming up with the elements of the proposed plan. And then that will be going back out to the public during that time for them to review. We will also be launching a website in the next couple of weeks where folks that are not on the committee or just want to weigh in will also have that opportunity. And I think the most important thing here is that we will also be providing information. I think it's interesting for folks to understand where funding comes from for transportation. As you saw today, when people think about SB1, this county gets pennies of that for local road improvement projects. And without funding from Measure T or an alternative source, that funding goes away. And as we know, for both the city of Madera, the city of Chowchilla, and the county, those funds are critical just to maintain what we have. So with that, I'd like to open it up for any questions from the board on where our activities are been at this point. And then if there are no questions, I'll turn that over to Dave Metz with FM3 for his report.
Any questions? Thank you.
Dave, it's all you.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much, Kendall, and thanks to all of you commissioners for the opportunity to be with you today. I'm Dave Metz with FM3 Research, and I'm going to walk through the highlights of our recent survey of Madera County voters to assess their support for a potential Measure T renewal measure. I'll say that overall, the survey results are fairly consistent with those obtained in the survey research work that you have done over the course of the last couple of years in terms of where residents' priorities lie, both in terms of transportation investment and other issues that are on their minds. But the responses do show adequate support for a renewal of Measure T at the 2/3 level, both before and after voters are exposed to some of the things that they would likely hear as part of a community conversation around the measure. The margin of support is not wide, and that will necessitate non-advocacy community education and work that the commission has already undertaken and continues to undertake. But the core support for continuing the investments that Measure T makes is broad across the community. With that, I'll go into some of the details of the survey findings, starting with a little bit about the methodology of the research. We interviewed almost 650 voters across Madera County who, based on their past voting behavior, are considered likely to cast ballots in next November's election. The survey was a multimodal survey. It was conducted both by phone and online. We interviewed respondents on landline phones, on wireless phones, and then sent them both email invitations and text messages to invite them to participate in an online version of the survey, which was also offered in both English and Spanish. And this combination of methods of outreach we find is the best way to get the most representative and diverse participation in surveys, just given the different ways that people communicate these days. To start with, we asked a few questions about the overall context of issues that are on voters' minds in Madera County. We started with a question that opens many of our surveys for public agencies, just asking people whether they think things in the county are going in the right direction or off on the wrong track. This is a sort of standard polling barometer question that's been used since the 1940s to understand how people feel about conditions in their community. And you'll see that residents are split on this question. About a little over a third think that things are headed in the right direction. 42% think that things are on the wrong track. For some context, statewide in California, these numbers today are 31% and 58% respectively. So people are more happy with conditions in Madera County than typically is the case statewide in California. They also rate their quality of life positively. We asked them to indicate whether they thought the county's quality of life overall was either excellent, good, only fair, or poor. And you'll see 52% rated excellent or good. Slightly fewer, 47% rated fair or poor. Again, not drastically different from what we see in a lot of communities around the state today. In terms of priorities moving forward, we offered the respondents a list of issues facing Madera County and asked them to rate each one as either extremely, very, somewhat, or not at all important to them personally. You'll see the responses here ranked by the proportion that rated each item either extremely or very important. Those are the top 2 points on that scale, the dark blue and the medium blue bars, and you'll see the total numbers running down the right-hand side. Not surprisingly, improving the local economy is number 1 on the list. That sort of core concern about the cost of living and affordability is really prominent across California right now. But right on par with that, we have improving the maintenance of local streets and roads, where we've got upwards of 4 in 5 county voters telling us they view that as a very important priority on a par with the economy and public safety. And I think that really speaks to the urgency that the public attaches to road conditions in the county. Note third from the bottom, we have preventing local tax increases. Now, while the proportion who prioritize that is not quite as broad as some of the items higher on the list, it's just under 3/4 of those polled, there are a large segment of voters who feel intensely about that. Almost half say it is extremely important to prevent local tax increases. Obviously, what's contemplated here is not an increase, it's a renewal. But nonetheless, seeing taxes on the ballot does trigger something for some voters, and I think it does reflect some continued concern about levels of taxation in the county. This question was one that was asked in your prior polling, both in 2021 and 2022. And so you can see here how the proportions of local voters who rate each of these issues as very important has evolved over the course of the last 3 years. And in most cases here, the differences are fairly minimal. There hasn't been a ton of change from poll to poll in how these items are ranked. Improving the maintenance of public roads, those shifts are all within the margin of error. So you see it down at the bottom of the list here, but it really reflects consistency more than any change. The only one where we see a statistically meaningful increase is the first one, improving public safety, which is up 7 points from where it was in 2022. We also asked the respondents to let us know whether they saw a great need, some need, a little need, or no real need for additional funding for transportation infrastructure, streets and roads. And 79% told us they see at least some need. This question is often a good barometer for the public's willingness to support additional public investment in transportation infrastructure. If they don't see a need, they're unlikely to be wanting to vote to tax themselves. And here you'll see there is a broad recognition of need, with almost 4 in 5 perceiving some need, and an outright majority of 54% telling us they see a great need. You'll see on the right-hand side of the slide some of the demographic groups within the county that are most likely to perceive a great need for additional funding. And it's a pretty diverse group, as you can see. Tends to be a little bit more Democratic and independent. That's the case when we're talking about any kind of public investment. But it really covers the spectrum in terms of a lot of different segments of the population who are saying, yes, there's a need for additional funding. So with that broad context, we tested respondents' willingness to support a renewal of the tax. And you'll see here the ballot language that we tested. We're trying to model what a voter would see on their ballot when they cast it. That's proven to be the most effective way to measure the level of support that voters offer. And this is based on prior polling and language that has performed well in past research in the county. I think the findings of this poll suggest that this ballot language is pretty well aligned with what the public prioritizes in terms of additional investments. You'll see we tested two different potential sunset lengths in the poll. For half of our respondents, we asked about a 30-year sunset. For half, we asked about a 20-year sunset. And given this language, we had roughly 2/3 of voters indicating that they would be supportive, with no statistically significant difference between the 30-year sunset and the 20-year sunset. So that number is obviously right at the threshold that a tax needs on the ballot. So it indicates that this is not something that voters are overwhelmingly sort of supporting by acclamation, but it does indicate that support is in that area of what is needed to win approval. As we break out different subsets of the population, you can see their levels of initial support here. And most of the patterns that we see are pretty typical of what we see on transportation measures. While there is majority support across partisan lines, it is broader among Democrats at 76% than it is among independents at 67% or Republicans at 59%. Not major differences by gender or by ethnicity. By age, the youngest voters tend to be more supportive, those under age 30, as are the oldest voters. Those over age 75 actually offer the highest level of support overall at 84%. So we asked our respondents to tell us in a few words of their own after they indicated how they would vote, a few reasons why in their own words. And you'll see here among those who said they would vote yes, we've grouped and categorized the responses they offered most often as the rationales for a yes vote. And the top item is simply a perception that roads are in really bad shape and need to be improved. And then a sizable subgroup also just say in general, without necessarily characterizing the roads as being bad, that there is a need for more maintenance or improvement. Those are the things that really stand out. There are others who point to safety concerns coming from road conditions, others who note that this is a tax that they're already paying. And this slide just gives you some examples of the things that our survey respondents told us in their own words were reasons for voting yes. I think, gives you a flavor for the way that they articulate it and some of the thought process that goes on in their minds for those who are supportive. And as you'll see, many of these comments are just expressing dissatisfaction with the condition of local roads. For those who indicated they would oppose the measure, the reasons are pretty straightforward. There's really three that are at the top of the list here. People saying we're taxed enough, we shouldn't be continuing a tax. People saying that they don't believe funds have been spent appropriately so far. And then perhaps related to that, about a quarter of the opponents saying that they haven't seen significant improvements to the roads from the tax being in place so far. And again, you can see here just some examples of things that opponents said in their own words. A lot of people saying enough money has already been collected. There ought to be ways of spending those dollars effectively to improve transportation without us having to continue the tax into the future. So we also asked the respondents to consider a list of different kinds of transportation improvements that might be supported through renewing Measure T and indicate how important they viewed each one to be. Again, this is a 4-point scale where the respondents rated each as either extremely, very, somewhat, or not too important. The numbers running down the right-hand side are the total proportion that rated each as either extremely or very important. We tend to keep an eye on those numbers and line that up with the proportion who are required to vote yes in order for the measure to succeed. So anything we're seeing is over that 2/3 threshold is a funding priority that we've got some initial opponents of the measure or some of those who are undecided who are saying, well, I may be ambivalent about the tax, but I think this is a worthwhile way to spend money. And not surprisingly, the things that are their top priorities, fixing potholes, paving and maintaining local streets and roads, right in line with the things they told us were their biggest concerns. We also tested a list of more specific transportation improvements and road and bridge and other safety improvements that would be located in specific areas of the county, broken out by supervisorial district. And you'll see those highly local descriptions, the one we tested for districts 3 and 4 and the one we tested for district 1, rank very high for voters among their investment priorities. The second tier here are all items that roughly 3/4 or more rate as being very important. You'll see a bundle of investments for District 5 comes in on this list. And then we have things like retrofitting or replacing bridges or overpasses with structural problems. Again, sort of falling in that basic maintenance and repair category. But then a few items that have to do with safety are also ranked as high priorities. Adding passing lanes and improving interchanges to improve safety and reduce collisions, and providing students with safe routes to walk and bike to school. As we move down to the third tier of funding priorities here, everything has support from at least 3 and 5 voters, but you'll see, this is right in that area where the voter approval threshold falls. You'll see the District 2 projects listed here again, poll relatively well with more than 2 and 5, rating them as extremely important investments. We have a few other things here that are related to safety, and then we've got keeping transit fares affordable and reducing traffic congestion, also items that fall into this tier. And then finally, we have the lower tier of items. These are ones that fewer than 3 and 5 rated as being very important priorities. And we've got a couple down toward the bottom of the slide that are only about 1/3 rating them as very important. And a lot of these are things that have to do with forms of transportation other than driving alone. Things like expanding local and regional transit services, bike lanes, opportunities for carpooling, van pooling, and ride sharing. I will note that even with those items that are lower on the list in terms of the people who rate them as urgent priorities, every single item on this list, at least 2/3 of those polled rate as being somewhat important. So the orange bars, which reflect the proportion who say this is not important, is no more than 1/3 for any of the things we tested, including the items that are lower on the list. So it isn't that voters are saying don't do these things or we don't want them. It's just that in relative terms, they see them as being less urgent. And clearly there's a range of improvements to transportation that local voters would like to see made. So the balance of the poll then focused on understanding how voters would react to some of the things that might be discussed as part of a community debate about renewal of the measure. We tested some arguments in favor and we tested some arguments in opposition, and then measured the degree to which support for the measure changed as voters heard more. After we tested arguments from supporters, the backing of the measure went up to 71% in favor, 23% opposed. So obviously well over that 2/3 threshold. But after the opposition messaging, it dropped down to 61%. So it does indicate the degree to which there are some objections that sizable number of voters see as concerning, even though we have a durable 3 and 5 that express support for the measure throughout. Here you'll see a list of statements in favor of the measure that we tested in the poll. On this first slide, everything we list, at least 40% of voters rated as a very convincing reason to vote yes. Those are the numbers you'll see on the left-hand side. And that's the threshold we usually look at as a cutoff for things that tend to be impactful in terms of the way that voters react to them, either as pro messages or con messages. A number of things at the top of the list really have to do with sort of the fiscal management of revenue from the measure, the opportunity to obtain matching funds by generating dollars locally, accountability provisions that will be in place to ensure transparency and sort of public ability to monitor how funds are used, and then messaging around repairs, around safety, around preparing for growth, and a message around the risk of fires and the need to have well-maintained, safe evacuation routes. All of those things stand out as being compelling to voters. The second tier of messages on the support side are shown here. And while none of them are things that voters reject out of hand, these ones have a little less urgency to them. Again, with fewer than 2 and 5 in all but one case, indicating that they view them as very convincing. The one at the top of the slide is a message that highlights that this is not a tax increase. It is simply a renewal of a voter-approved funding source that voters are already paying. Now, when we add, the numbers I just showed you are the proportion that rated each message as very convincing. When we add the proportion that rated each somewhat convincing, that's the light blue bars here that are added to the dark blue bars, you'll see that the breadth of these messages in terms of the proportion who say, yeah, that's a good reason to vote yes, exceeds 60% for everything that we tested, although that top tier are well over 70%. We did the same kind of testing for objections that might be raised to the measure, and we tried to raise the kind of things that in the course of community discussion around past measures have been flagged as reasons to potentially oppose it. And you'll see there are a few things here that more than 40% see as very convincing reasons to vote no. Not wanting to continue taxes, framed as raising taxes here, given the struggles that businesses and residents are having with the cost of living, concerns about government waste, and then pointing to the fact that voters have rejected a prior version of a renewal measure. Concerns around other transportation taxes, the sort of intersection of the renewal of this measure with the wildfire protection plan, and then arguing that there has not been sufficient public input are concerns for smaller numbers of voters, although for a couple of them it's close to 2 and 5. And you'll see here when for these opposition messages we add in the proportion who find them somewhat convincing. On average, they rank a little bit lower than the arguments in favor, but there are still sizable majorities who say, yes, these are concerning statements and reasons potentially to vote no. And that contributes to some of the drop off in support that we saw in the poll numbers I showed you earlier. So that takes us to the key findings from the survey. Basically, the data suggests that it should be possible to pass a renewal measure in 2024. If voters choose to do so, but that the margins would likely be very slim if they do. We start out with 66% in favor. The high watermark that we see in the poll is 71%. That obviously leaves very little margin for error. The 20-year or 30-year sunset, there seems to not be a material difference in voters' reaction to those two terms, nothing statistically significant in terms of the survey. And there are some clear central priorities that the public has in terms of transportation investment around fixing potholes, improving roads, and maintaining them to ensure that they're in better condition than they are today. Now, it is clear that, given the relatively tight margins of support here, a public understanding, if the commission chooses to move forward, of what they're proposing to do and why and how the money will be put to work is going to be very important. And so efforts to educate the public, again, not advocate, but just let them know if you choose to move forward, why you're doing so and where the money will go, will be critically important. And that's underscored by the concern that we see that the voters in the county have, both about taxes and about the cost of living, which obviously across California right now are reasons why voters look with some skepticism at funding measures. So that's a review of the highlights. Happy to answer any questions about the data that commissioners have.
Just a comment, very good report. Thank you so much for all the work that went into this.
Yeah, I said the same thing here, Matt. Thank you. I couldn't help but notice that the metrics when it came to like carpooling and bikes didn't score as high, especially maybe in this, I want to call it rural areas, but they're more Central Valley type of cities that probably don't resonate as much as other more urbanized cities, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's not an uncommon pattern. And frankly, even in denser urban areas, in relative terms, those items still tend to rank as lower priorities. The gap, though, I think is a little bit larger in Madera County than what we might see in a large urban center.
The one thing that I did see very consistent is the need for just fixing roads and potholes. I think that even with the last survey that we had prior to the previous measure attempt there, that was the number one thing that people wanted to see. I think for us, I hate to bring back the sunset, or the forever tax, but I think the majority of people certainly see the need for improvement of our roads, especially with potholes and, just fixing the sidewalks, getting public safety, sidewalks and all that other transportation needs that we have in our community.
Also, I think it was interesting to see like between 20 and 30 years, there's not much of a difference. So as long as there is a sunset. Any other questions? Any comments from the commissioners? Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you for the report and update.
Thank you. Please let us know if you have other questions or if there's other things we can do to be helpful.
Thank you. And now moving on to the next information item, which is 10B 2023 focus on the future conference recap.
Me, it feels like it was such a long time ago, but we attended the Focus on the Future conference. It was around Halloween, so it's at the end of October.
Yeah.
And the self-help conference is made up of the self-help counties from the state of California. And one of the larger attended conferences, I think there was over 8 million attendees, but from representing Madera, we had one from each jurisdiction. So we had our chair, Councilmember Rodriguez and Supervisor Poitras attend. So normally when we attend meetings or conferences, I like to give you an opportunity to speak about anything that you might have learned or brought back. The main purpose really is networking and meeting a lot of the other colleagues that we work with and consulting firms and gather as much information as you can and see what they're doing and what might or might not work for us here in our world.
Thank you. I mean, it was a great opportunity to attend and great presentation by our director as well. I like all in all, what I learned out of it with the limited resources, it was all about the teamwork. Coming out of the crisis and getting back into the field and networking with other people. I think it was a great opportunity and to working together with the other agencies. It was a lot to learn and it was a great way of getting back in there and with using the resources that we have. So overall, the main theme was networking and working together as a team. So I learned a lot. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
I would just like to say, Mr. Chairman, that my takeaway was that we're not the Lone Ranger as far as our region goes in regards to what our needs are and what the disconnect is with certain parties that are pushing certain initiatives. It was stated by many regions around the state that it's not a one size fits all, and even some of the metropolitan areas. So it's not a sometimes they'll like to, people will say, well, you're the San Joaquin Valley, you guys are the outliers, and you're the, people who all you want to do is widen freeways and so forth. But we heard that from many, many regions that there's many of the things that are being pushed, not suggested, pushed down people's throats are not well taken, and that there's a lot of issues and nuances with a lot of the approaches that are taken. So I thought that was really interesting to hear from people around the state.
That we all have the same needs.
Mm-hmm.
More funding.
Yeah, I think we need more money.
I'll just add that, just having the opportunity to visit the exhibit hall with a lot of the sponsors there, believe it or not, the technology that's been already incorporated in a lot of the ways we look at transportation. One of the things that I was fascinated by was, in how they track vehicles nowadays. I don't know if you recall that they had those black strips on roads, and that's how they track how many vehicles are passing by. Well, technology has shifted, and with software that I think we'll be adopting here shortly as well, is you can pretty much extract a lot of data of who was driving. Obviously there's a lot of privacy involved, but typically it gives us a good amount of information as far as the needs for transportation, whether it be in the local areas and or out in the main corridors. But that was one of the biggest things that I got is, just looking at other municipalities that face the same challenges that we do. Again, self-help communities that have to impose a certain amount of a sales tax measure to be able to, again, bridge the gap in that funding source. And what I took from it, obviously a lot of folks out there are good speakers out there, but one thing that I did want to just mention is that I guess when we want to advocate for something, we really have to have a seat at the table. And the one thing I took from, I think he was the mayor of, I'm not sure if it was Alameda, but he said equity is not a comfortable topic sometimes. It rubs folks the wrong way, sometimes due to foreign interpretation of how they visualize what equity is. But equity means having to share resources that otherwise sometimes are not shared. But overall, it had a big impact in the room when he was speaking, but it certainly had an impact on me in the way we look at transportation. We have to, as much, like I said, the word equity can mean many different things, and people can interpret that differently, and how you visualize that also has a different interpretation. But I think we do have to come back to the table, and when we talk to our partners, obviously here in our community, I think we see that, and we certainly try to do a good job of trying to incorporate that into all the policies that we have here. So with that, Mr. Chair, that's pretty much what I took from it. Again, thank you for facilitating that for us. It's a great seeing not only our chair, but also Supervisor Poitras, and not to mention the events that we attended, the flashbacks to the 20s. I think that Supervisor Poitras certainly you made that happen for sure.
It's not too hard when you're as old as I am.
I almost asked you for a hat, but
That's it for that item. It was informational.
Thank you. And with that, moving on to another item, which is item number 11, miscellaneous, and 11A. Item for consent.
We don't have any items from staff unless other staff have an item, other than wishing you all a, happy holidays, safe holiday. We won't be seeing each other till after the new year.
Good. And from the Caltrans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And hope everybody had a happy Thanksgiving. Appreciate MCTC rescheduling past the holiday this year. Last year we had that marathon meeting the night before Thanksgiving.
Not next year. I'm good.
So appreciate that. Well, Director Taylor and Mr. Levitt and Mr. Finley took all my good talking points with all the buddies. So, but seriously, kudos to the Madera County region. You guys got a lot of competencies. I think we're very successful, but that's the result of all the hard work you guys put in. So appreciate that, all the support. All I could offer really is hopes and dreams of future funding opportunities right now. So we did put out a call for letter of support for the RAISE program. We were expecting that notice of funding opportunity to go out already. As not, so we did extend our deadline for any agency that's looking for letter of support. We're going to extend that to 10 days past the issuance of the notice of funding opportunity when that eventually comes out. For the Caltrans planning grants, we did host a workshop in October last month. It was well attended. I think pretty much most of our member agencies were represented in that. And just a reminder, since we're not meeting December, the application deadline for those planning grants is January 18th. We have had conversation with many of your agencies about potential grant opportunities. I want to talk a little about 99, the corridor management plan we're working on. We had a managed lane workshop back in October 20th. That's one of the early deliverables, is looking at the viability of managed lanes on State Route 99. That was also well attended. I'll be honest, it was very, as you know, this is a multi-district quarter plan work on, but was really focused on District 6. So we are a lot further along with the funding opportunities we have on 9-9. We've also been having executive briefings as well. We had one on November 2nd, and the next one is December 7th. We're trying to make sure that all of our MPO partner directors are fully informed of what we're doing and how the consultants are proceeding. This Friday, we're having a managed lane workshop with our stakeholders. So many attended the kickoff meeting. I think it was back in September, the various cities and counties and cogs up and down the corridor. So we're having a workshop this Friday as well. They've all been invited. As far as South Madera project, South Madera 6th lane, obviously we already talked about the additional ITIP funding they received. So we continue to work on that project. And obviously it was good news to hear about funding for PNED or environmental phase for Avenue 17 to 22 on the north end. So we're already having conversations internally and strategizing about, we're getting environmental started, how we're going to fund, PSNE and right away. So we're looking at the upcoming TCEP guidelines. I know they're talking about different phases of projects they might allow. So this is obviously front and center for our district as far as pursuing grant opportunities to fund the subsequent phases like design and right away components of that project. We continue to work on the downtown Madera 145 project. We're still looking at tentative construction date of spring of 2025 and looking to have that project ready to advertise by end of next year with the added components for complete streets. The 9-9 Cottonwood Creek Bridge replacement, that project, we had that groundbreaking back in April. That's a 420 working day project. We do expect to button up here pretty quick for winter suspension. So the construction has been moved out of the creek since the end of last month, and the South Bridge deck has been poured. So currently they're working on the approach slabs, and we'll probably see winter suspension occurring from January to April. The Rancho's rehab project, that's the rehab project out at 41, just north of 145. That project will also be going into winter suspension probably sometime next month. The bridge work is pretty much complete. There'll be some polyester concrete. They'll have to wait till after it comes out of winter suspension due to the temperatures. That project is scheduled to be complete by July of next year. And then for Chowchilla, we have our rehab project that has the complete street elements we're doing with the added bike lanes and ADA improvements and sidewalk, et cetera, that's been presented to the city council. We are currently still in the environmental process, and we're targeting wrapping up environmental by June of next year, then moving forward to subsequent phases. With that, I do share the same sentiments about the focus on the future. I thought it was a great conference. Good seeing you all there. I do think Greg did a great job representing Madera County as part of the panel. And then lastly, I'm probably going to request MCTC support in my own investment planning, meaning that the $9,000 return to get $80 million project. I don't know if it's Troy I need to talk to or what, but if I get a return on my investment like that, I'm all in. So no, but that, again, that just speaks to the great work you all are doing. So thank you for that support and appreciate the partnership. That's all I have.
You, any questions for the council? Just a request there, Mike, as I drive down 99 back into town, heading northbound from between 9 and 2, is it 9 and 12? Right lane, I know that there's a couple of bumps there, or at least potholes.
Northbound direction, you said correct?
Right.
Okay.
I was just gonna mention also, Michael, I don't know if you remember, one of the director's comments, she came up with a new term for our modal efforts, valley modal. We've heard of multimodal, this is valley modal. It's about, what we do here in the valley, not what everybody else does. So it's a new term that we developed.
Yeah, we'll see how that resonates in our grant application. Interesting if that resonates with CPC and federal highways. Try that.
They'll sit here and go, what is this?
I know, people probably thought I just made a mistake when I was speaking, but we were talking about valley mode.
How we get around different, just the comments talking about earlier with the transit and looking at micro transit and other opportunities. Yeah, different tools for different jobs.
Thank you. With that, do we have any update from the commissioners?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank Caltrans for partnering with Madera Evening Lions. I'm an Evening Lions member. Tomorrow, we're having our Christmas parade in downtown on Yosemite at 6 o'clock. And this will be hopefully the year we don't have rain, because we're always out there in the rain and we get sick afterwards because we get soaked for like 4 hours. So come join us tomorrow night at 6 o'clock for that event. That's all, Chair.
Thank you. Anything?
Nothing to add.
Nothing.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I adjourn this meeting. Thank you.
We got all the things signed.